So I want to add some, I want to frame what you're going to hear about this evening a little bit. I don't know if you guys saw this, but last year in 2013, for the first time in a really long time, heart disease was not the number one killer in America anymore. What was it? How did you know that? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So we decided when we were putting together our menu of events for this year, we wanted to talk about that. We've never done one of these specific to cancer before, which is really silly when you think about it, because what we do all day is try to turn people's nervous systems all the way on so that their immune system works the way it's supposed to. And that very, very largely plays a role in whether or not somebody gets or fights or beats cancer. And so we knew that, but we figured that we weren't doing a very good job of explaining that to people. And we also felt like that the way that it's being presented to you and I right now is that it's a lottery. Not a good lottery, a bad one, right? Meaning, I hope I don't get it, right? And if you haven't been affected by cancer personally, you can, in your family, find one or two people who you already know have been, right? It's everywhere. It is. It's a huge deal. And we know way more about it that's empowering than you're reading about in the paper. So, on that note, last year I'm at a seminar, and it wasn't your average everyday sit at a hotel type of seminar. They took us to up in the mountains of Colorado where I could hardly breathe, and they trained us really hard on some really cool principles. But while I'm up there, there's this lady there, this chiropractor, who is in the town, like right next to my town, right? And we're in Colorado, and we hung out a little bit. I knew who she was. But we're up there in the mountains, and we're both from Washington, and we got to hanging out, and I heard her story for the very first time, and how she had been affected by cancer in a very major way, and it really stuck with me. So when we decided we wanted to do a topic like this as one of our monthly themes, she was the first person I went to and said, would you be kind enough to come and share your journey and your story and what you've learned and what you know and what you teach your patients about, so that you can help empower our community up here. And so on Saturday, Genie, as she's prepping, she's got her talk all put together. She's at a retreat, and she gets stung by a bee, and she's allergic to bees. And she goes into anaphylactic shock, like EpiPen, the whole deal. And so last night I talked to her on the phone, and I couldn't hear her very well. And I was like, are you sure you want to do this? And she said, yes, I definitely want to come. I want to do it. And so you can hear her today, so that's a good thing. We don't need to get her a microphone. But she put a lot into this and is going to put more into it over the next hour because she's not feeling 100%, but she wants you to. So she's going to come and present for us over the next bit to tell us a little bit about, or a lot about, what we can do to change maybe the direction, the course of our health going forward. So please help me welcome Dr. Genie Markwell.
All right, so thank you all for coming out tonight and sharing some time. I know that evenings and lives are very busy, and this is a topic that's very important to me, that's very personal for me. And as Dr. Collins said, he asked me if I wanted to come do this quite some time ago, so I've had a lot of time to think about it. And initially, when I came forward with this, I was going to share my story, my journey, and hoping that you guys could take something out of that to relate to, or find peace in, or perhaps use in your journey. God forbid you have one. And when I really thought about it, I decided that that wouldn't best serve you. And so when I talk about things tonight, I will impart bits of my journey, but I'm not going to go into depth about it because really this night is about you guys. It's not about me. And so I want to share from that perspective. Cancer is a really delicate topic, and it's something that there are a lot of different thoughts and feelings and emotions and fears, and I think a lot of confusion around, and as Dr. Collins said, it's kind of a lottery. It's like, well, I hope I don't get it. And it's something that in having a discussion around it, it needs to be a sensitive topic, a sensitive discussion. And so I try to move through that in a very respectful way, understanding that different people have different experiences and everybody's journey would be totally different in going through it. So that's something I just hold a great deal of respect for. And I'll try to navigate that in a very open and raw, but a very careful way. So some of the things that I want to go over are the current facts. I will share some of my opinions. My goal tonight is to give you guys a deeper understanding, because oftentimes when you understand the process, when you have knowledge to support you through something, it's not quite as scary. You can move through it in a powerful way, and that's really important when you're dealing with cancer. And then going over some alternatives and ways that I've learned how to overcome it. So, how many people in this room have been, either personally or someone they know personally, has been touched by cancer? Pretty much everybody. It's, I thought that was a fairly safe assumption, because 1 out of every 2 men and 1 out of every 3 women at this age and stage are currently impacted by cancer personally. That's a staggering statistic to me. You know, the odds are not really in our favor in this regard. And, you know, with that, it's like, well, you know, why me and not you or you? You know, or why you and not you? And that's something that in my journey was really important for me to figure out and understand. And we'll talk about that. So in 2014, this was a 2013 journal from the American Cancer Society, the estimated number of new diagnoses of cancer. Does anyone want to take a guess even? Just a ballpark.
2 million.
2 million? That is a very good guess. 1,665,540. So.
And is that in the U.S.?
In the U.S. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's estimated that there will be over 500,000 deaths this year from cancer. That's a large number of people. The overall cost in 2009 was estimated to be $216.6 billion for direct medical costs, and an additional $130 billion for indirect costs. So the direct costs are the expenses of treatment and care. The indirect costs is time lost at work and inability to work due to premature death. And we are one of the wealthiest, healthiest, quote-unquote, nations in the U.S., and we spend so much money towards research and fundraising and, excuse me, you know, in this industry, yet we still have such a high death rate, a high level of new instances being, you know, coming through, and then a huge amount of money spent on it. And with this study in 2011, that was from the National Institute of Health. In 2011, they developed a secondary group called the Medical Expenditures Panel, or the MEPS group, to collect more accurate and finite data in regard to the costs of cancer. And in 2012, the National Institute of Health decided that they would no longer publish this information, which I find that very odd. Like, we have all of these things going on to raise money for cancer, yet they don't want us to know what the true costs are, what the costs of loss is, and really what's happening in the industry. And that raises an eyebrow for me. So, the average cost of an 8-week chemotherapy treatment. Does anyone want to take a guess on that? 8 weeks.
100 grand?
Thankfully, not so much. It ranges between $300,000 and $30,000, and that's current data through Johns Hopkins. And the $300 chemo drugs are typically not given in individual status, so they would be in combination with other ones. So even though they come as low as $300, they usually, with that particular drug, would add 2 to 3 other ones on top of it. The average monthly cost of cancer over the course of 1 year, this is out-of-pocket patient expense, $10,000 a month for treatment. That's after the insurance has kicked in and covered what they're going to, on average. So one of the leading causes of bankruptcy in our nation is medical. And in most of those cases, it's people that have had insurance. And so it's really a system that's very broken. And in my experience, I actually didn't have insurance. And facing that was really scary at first. And what I found is that when I was going to have lab work done, and I did have insurance, my lab was $900 per quarter. So every 3 months, $900 in lab tests. And there was a glitch where the labs went through and they were processed as that I didn't have insurance. And I got the bill and it was $75 if I paid cash. So I canceled my insurance because it cost me less money to not have insurance. And I went through my process in a very natural way, in a very alternative way. And that could be a whole different class in itself, so I'm not going to get into the depth of that. But the basis of why this is so important to me, that there's an understanding behind why our industry is so broken, is that when I did opt to have a surgical procedure, in the very end of my struggle, I did have medical intervention, and the procedure through insurance would have cost $43,000. And because I didn't have insurance, I got to pay $3,500 cash for the same care, the same procedure, the same situation. And people don't know that those options even exist. So in this industry that is costing so much money, that is bankrupting our neighbors, like, there are alternatives out there and ways that we can do things that don't cost nearly as much, that don't impact the body nearly as much or nearly as negatively. It's just a matter of asking the right questions and finding the right resources. And so that's something that's become really important in my process of working with the patients that I do that have cancer, is helping to open up those doors for them to find those resources.
But you're saying that $43,000 would have been billed to the insurance, not to
Correct.
you, right? Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And so at my 80-20% previous insurance policy, I still would have been paying, $9 grand. So, yeah. So 1 in 285. This is the likelihood of a child being diagnosed with cancer before the age of 20. Now, what are the most common types of cancer in adults? Does anybody know?
Breast and prostate.
It is breast and prostate, site-specific cancers. With children, we see lymphocytic leukemia, brain tumors, neuroblastoma, Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Those are the most common. And all of those are brain, nervous system, and lymphatic system. So that's our nervous system and our immune system. The reason being, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is that childhood is the highest growth rate of our development as human beings. So our nervous system and our lymphatic system, or our immune system, are in their highest developmental state of growth as children. And the younger we are, the more rapid that growth happens. We'll get to this part later, but cancer is uncontrolled cellular growth. So it's hard to understand, and it really is hard to cope with the fact that a child can be diagnosed with cancer, but if their body's not being supported properly from the time of conception throughout, and there are weaknesses in their system, and then their development goes a little askew, it can happen. And at this age and stage, there are 19,000 students in Highline School District. That would be 67 kids right now in our school system that are likely dealing with cancer. That's a crazy thought. So I'm not here to bash on the medical profession or the nurses or doctors or any of the support staff that work in the industry. They are truly people that are compassionate, that are there because they are doing the best that they can within their paradigm to provide you the best care that they have access to. It's not the people that are in the system that are at fault. And I love to use this analogy that the medical association, the medical system or standard of care is kind of like the fire department. If your house is on fire, they're going to come in with their axes and their fire hoses, and they're going to do the best that they can to save your house. And in the medical system, if our body is the house and the axes and fire hoses are drugs and surgery, they're going to come in when you're in crisis and save your house. And we are very thankful that we have the opportunity to allow them to do that. But would it make sense for them to come back a week later and spray your house again, just preventatively, after the fire already happened? That doesn't make sense, right? But what if we were going to do it once a month over the next 4 or 5 years? We'll just come back and spray your house just in case. Does that make any sense? It really doesn't. You know, what would happen if that was true? If they came back and sprayed your house? What would happen?
You get a lot of mold.
A lot of mold. It would rot. It would mold. It would continue to be destructive towards the things that are in your home. And medicine works the same way. And so for emergency care, the way that our system is set up is very important and very beneficial. But to treat ongoing illness or stress or crisis, the way that we treat emergency care is really not, it's not working for us. And so the alternative professions, chiropractic, massage, naturopathy, acupuncture, we're more of the contractors. We're the finished carpenters and your woodworkers and plumbers. We can come back and help you build your house. We can do repairs and maintenance and upgrades throughout the process to help you prevent crisis in your house. But if we're going to show up at the fire, we look kind of silly, don't we? You know, if I show up at the fire with my sander and, you know, a hammer, like, what am I going to do with that? So I'm not saying that there's not a place for medicine in crisis care and in healthcare. There is, and it's a very important place. And again, I'm thankful for the times where they've been available and I've needed it. But in terms of long-term care, their systems are failing. Our healthcare system as a whole is failing. And so we need to look at things from a different perspective in order to see change in that and in the way that our bodies respond to that care. So in thinking about cancer specifically, we know that the normal courses of treatment are chemo and radiation, most common. With that, can we all agree that those things have side effects? Okay? And so, in the short term, it's a very personal choice, but you have to weigh the risks and the benefits of dealing with those side effects. Now, I've known a lot of people that have passed that have had cancer. And in my personal experience of the people that I know personally, none of them died from cancer. They died because of complications of a weakened immune system after dealing with chemotherapy and radiation and then catching pneumonia or catching, developing a bacterial infection or something like that. Not one person that I know that had cancer died of cancer. And so it's something to really consider when you're facing that decision of what is it going to do overall? Will it take care of this, and what's the likelihood that that's going to be a success? And in different types of cancers and different types of chemos have different success rates statistically that are out there, and being aware of what those are I think is very important. But then also, are there alternatives? Are you in a phase where there are options that you can pursue prior to making that decision and knowing what that looks like as well? So understanding what cancer is and how it works, I think, is an important part. And I know that in my experience in receiving diagnoses on 2 different occasions, nobody explained to me how or why I got it. And that was something that was really hard for me because as a chiropractor, at the time, my second diagnosis, I was a fitness competitor, exercising every single day. I ate completely clean, no sugar, no gluten, rarely had coffee. I ate, fresh fruits and organic, fruits and vegetables, lean meats. I was exercising like a champ, and which we'll talk about that a little bit too later. But I was getting adjusted. I got massage. I meditate. I was doing everything right. It didn't make sense to me why or how possibly could I have cancer. It didn't make any sense. I mean, I'm like one of the healthiest people I know. And it was very frustrating. And so I really looked into the basics, the simple basics of what cancer is. And it truly is just uncontrolled cell regeneration. So they're damaged cells that proliferate in an uncontrolled way. And in the first picture here, we have normal cells. And then here we show the abnormal cells. And there's a process that our body goes through that we'll touch on a little bit later, but cells have a normal cycle. And when that cycle gets interrupted, that's when the mutations can happen and the cells become abnormal cells. And in a normal cell cycle, cells run their process, and then they die, and then they're eaten up by other cells in the body, macrophages. And with abnormal cells, or cancer cells specifically, they don't die. They just continue to proliferate. So there's a glitch in the system of how our body's supposed to heal or deal with those sort of things that doesn't happen. And that's the cell basically killing itself, going through its natural normal process. And we'll talk about a little bit later why that happens. But this is literally what it looks like, the difference between a healthy cell and an unhealthy cell. There are over 100 different types of identified cancer nowadays. And they are identified from either the cell or the tissue that they originate from. So for every new discovery, there's a new name and a new chemical that they attach to it. But we have over 100 different types now. So we should talk about that. So looking at the process of cell mutation here, we have a normal cell, and then there are reasons why the cell can mutate. And it literally is a change in the DNA of the cell. And that happens through repetitive stress. It can be a hereditary issue. You can have a genetic predisposition to cancer. However, in genes, they have to be turned on in order to express. Just as they have to be turned on, they can also be turned off. So one of the areas that I spend a lot of time studying is epigenetics. And having that understanding, I think a lot of people lose hope when they get the diagnosis, because if another family member has already had cancer, they're like, oh, well, you know, it was just a matter of time. You know, my family had it, so I'm going to have it. And even having that thought can create enough stress to turn on that gene. So there's that. Then there's also chemical toxicity, radiation, and repetitive cellular injury, which comes from physical, chemical, or emotional measures. So when we have those mutations, then we have that proliferation where the cells continue to replicate themselves. And you can have a whole bunch of abnormal cells, but if it's in one tissue layer, that is not considered cancer. It's considered cancer as soon as it breaks through into a second tissue layer. And so that's a really interesting thing to think about, because we all have abnormal cells within our body. And thinking about it from that perspective, tomorrow, someone in this room could be diagnosed with cancer because their body took it from here and went to there. And it's not, I don't say that to produce fear or anything like that, but just as we have that capability to go from here to here, we have the capability to go from here to here. Our bodies are designed to naturally heal. Cancer is a biological experience. And through that process, you know, when we cut ourselves, we know and we believe fully that that cut's going to heal. We don't even think about it. But for some reason, there's a stigma attached to this illness that when we get that diagnosis, we don't have that same belief, not at the same core level. And even having that doubt can change the way that our body responds to what's happening. So health is a state of balance. Can we agree upon that? And that can be defined in a lot of different ways. The normal process of healthy tissue is you're in a state of balance, there's health, and if there's injury to that tissue, you go into a state that disrupts balance. That sends a signal through the body to produce an oxidative stress or an oxidation, where oxidation is the taking of an electron from a cell, which have you guys heard of free radicals? So an injury to the cell creates a free radical. It loses an electron and it becomes a free radical. And so oxidation, does anybody know what oxidation actually is, what that process looks like?
Rust.
Rust, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Another great example is if you were to cut an apple in half and you left it on the counter, what happens? It turns brown, right? So if you were to squeeze lemon on that same apple, what happens?
Doesn't turn brown.
Doesn't turn brown, it refreshes. So that's what an antioxidant does to a free radical. And so that happens within the tissue within our body. Now, when oxidation happens, then our inflammatory system kicks in. This is where our immune system steps in. And we create cytokines and different chemicals that help to provide inflammation, because inflammation also brings all the properties that our body needs to heal. So is inflammation healthy or is that sick?
Healthy.
It is. It's a healthy response. And then healing happens. So that's the natural process of cellular health and healing. Now with cancer, we're generally in a state of imbalance, whether we know it or not, whether we're expressing it yet or not, there is a state of imbalance. When we have injury, and again, injury or stress could be chemical, physical, emotional, it could be literal injury, it could be, dealing with broken-hearted emotions. I mean, it could be a broad spectrum when we talk about injury, so I ask you to open that up a little bit in terms of the way you're thinking about it. But when there's persistent injury in this situation, then oxidation becomes very excessive, so that cellular degeneration happens at a very fast rate, and then that creates uncontrolled and chronic inflammation, which acute inflammation is healthy, but chronic inflammation can be damaging. And then there's cellular regression and mutation, which then leads to that proliferation. So all of these different processes are going on within our body, and they happen all the time. And in most cases, they're happening without us even know it. It's internal. We don't feel it. We don't see it. But there are always little cues. And that's one thing that I invite you guys to be very aware of what's going on with your body. When I, again, with my second diagnosis, I never felt sick, not even for a day. I never felt sick. I felt awesome. I felt healthy. I was competing on the national level as a fitness competitor and traveling and working in my office and had all these things going on that I thought my life was great. However, if I have permission to get a little personal here, at the time, my marriage was falling apart. We actually were not living together at the time, and going there, if I can get a little personal, I'm going to get vulnerable here with you guys. I hadn't had any kind of physical interaction in that sense for a very long time. So although I thought my life was great and things were going well, there was this area of my life that was not in function. It was in complete dysfunction. So the fact that I ended up with cervical cancer was not a huge surprise for me. And that's a hard thing to swallow. But in looking at that, the trigger that got me to go to the doctor finally to figure this out is I had ongoing back pain over a year. I had been getting adjusted, I was doing massage, I was working out all the time, I ate totally healthy, like, I'm a chiropractor, I'm not supposed to have back pain, you know? And so it finally got to the place where I'm like, I think I should go and just have an exam. Maybe I have endometriosis or something like that. My hormones were all goofed up. I was 4% body fat for like 4 years. So there's a point where exercise can become unhealthy. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it occurred to me that maybe this training and this diet and this hardcore lifestyle of fitness was creating issues with my hormones. Very reasonable. So I went into the doctor thinking that I had fibroids or something like that, and then find out, no, I'm in crisis. But it was back pain. It had nothing to do with my female systems or cycles. It had nothing to do with me feeling sick. But my body kept giving me clues. And in my first diagnosis, I had a pituitary tumor, so a brain tumor. And with that one, I was pregnant at the time. Like, you're supposed to feel sick when you're pregnant, you know, so I just didn't think anything of it. And then I started to lose right side peripheral vision. And I never felt sick. I mean, I felt morning sick. I felt pregnant sick. But it never in a million years would have occurred to me that I had a brain tumor. But I was driving, you know, as I do, and I'm not very tall, but I could see where I'm going. I kept hitting things on the right side, and I couldn't figure it out, and I was having these headaches, and so I got my eyes checked, and turns out they could see, based on the closed-off vascularity of my right eye, that there was a tumor overlapping the right optic nerve. And so, you know, being aware of what keeps showing up for you, when you know, there is that internal instinct of something's just not right. You know, and it might be as simple as, I just feel so freaking tired. Like, sometimes they're subtle symptoms, but sometimes they just jump right out at you. And so being aware and paying attention to those things is hugely important, and monitoring how your body's doing. So we talked about the natural cell cycle, and it goes through, and traditionally, when a cell does its job, it starts to break apart, and then we have other cells that come in and envelop those, and so we don't have these random bioparticles running around in our body. Our body has a natural way of taking care of that. So how can we help this process? What can we do to support the process, regardless of what sort of treatment you choose? our immune system plays such an incredible role in our body's ability to thrive and survive. So thinking about the apple, that was a simple one, but have you ever, I'll make it graphic, this one, but has everyone here like seen a little squirrel running outside? You know, cute little squirrel, fluffy, big tail, you know, very energetic. Have you ever also seen a squirrel on the side of the road? Okay. How long does it take for that squirrel to become skeleton?
Not very long.
Like 2 to 3 weeks. Within 2 to 3 weeks, that body will decompose, break down, be eaten apart, and left with bones and fur. And the difference of the fluffy squirrel running around and the one on the side of the road is that when their life force is taken and their immune system and their nervous system shut down, there's no protection. So our immune system keeps that from happening to us as we are still animated Earth. And thinking about it from that perspective for me, for some reason, was like a big aha. Because if my immune system has that much control over me being able to, not rot and die as I walk the earth, that's a pretty big job. That's a big role. It does a lot. And I'm thankful that I don't have to think about it. It just happens for me, and all of you. And, there are plenty of different things out there that are waiting to feed on us. And sometimes internally they will. But we can do things to support the process of keeping our immune system strong and where it should be so that they don't overcome us. So how does the immune system work? Our immune system starts in development at 5 weeks gestation. So when a person finds out that they're pregnant, just after that first month, the newborn or the embryos, the immune system has already started. And it's the thymus that develops first. Then the thymus starts making stem cells, which stem cells is a huge thing in science and in medicine right now. And then some stem cells become T cells, which are the fighter cells for our immune system. And that's where the process starts. So it starts at the basis of our development. The only thing that develops prior to that is the nervous system, so the brain and spinal cord, and the heart. So just like the nervous system, there are 2 branches of the nervous system. We have our sympathetic and parasympathetic, which is stress and protection, growth and repair. In our immune system, we also have 2 branches. We have our Th1 system and our Th2 system. And Th1 is generally everything that you can think of that's an excretion. So fevers, rashes, diarrhea and vomiting. It's anything that you're trying to expel from your body. And in a Th1 cellular immune response, your body will encapsulate whatever it is and try to expel it. In a Th2 system, that's systemic, or they call it humoral. And with that one, that's more like the achy pain. So when you get the flu and just your bones ache, that's your Th2 system kicking into gear. Fatigue, cognitive impairment, like those moments when you have a headache or you're feeling sick and your brain's just not working quite right, that's all Th2. It's really important that both of these systems are working for us simultaneously. Now, when we're born as infants, we're born in a Th1 phase. And the reason being is that if we were systemic already, and the mom at the time of birth is also in a Th1 immune phase, and the reason being is if they were both systemic, the mom and baby would start attacking each other because we're foreign bodies to each other. So we start in a sterile Th1 phase at birth. And then it's the passing through the birthing canal that's the first dose of bacteria that we get within our system to change that sterile environment into a thriving environment. And having that bacteria is a huge important part in the development of the immune system of an infant. So babies that are born C-section, and I believe this might be in here later, but they are 2 times more likely to get cancer or have an autoimmune condition than a baby that's born vaginally. Hugely because of the stress that happens during the pass-through of the canal, but also because they're missing out on that first dose of bacteria. So we get exposure through the mouth and the nose, and then the Th2 system doesn't actually kick in until about year 2 to 5 for an infant. So kids are at great risk of being out of balance only in that cellular immune phase until about 5 to 7 years old. And so seeing the incidence of childhood cancers when they're already in a weakened immune state, when our bodies are not in our daily lifestyle being supported, as healthily as they could be as a blanket statement. Most of the people in this room probably are doing things a little bit different, but the general population as a whole doesn't know the impact of eating organic food or being adjusted on a regular basis, or dealing with stress reduction and meditation and prayer and those sorts of things. And so we're seeing it more and more commonly. So yeah, I did put in here. So it's based on the epigenetic changes that predispose newborns to certain diseases such as cancer, asthma, and diabetes in the earlier part of their life. That was from Birth, Health, and Body News in July 2014. So it's a recent study that came out. So finding that balance, the normal balance of the Th1, Th2 is important. When we tip to a Th1 heavy, Th2 light phase, that's an autoimmune response. So that's, again, cellular immunity. Our body starts attacking itself. When we go heavy to the other side, a systemic response without the cellular mediation, then we go into cancer. And so it's very rare that you'll truly see someone that has an autoimmune condition and cancer at the same time. It's hard to be in that place because it's an immune function. One of the things that I've personally dealt with is that I have celiac, which is an autoimmune disease, and I also have had cancer. And so I've gone from cancer to autoimmune to cancer to autoimmune. And so for me in my body, I've had a very hard time regulating and balancing those immune functions. And it's something that I've put a lot of study into. And even with that, I still struggle to find that balance. So it's not an easy task, but it can be done. So a balanced immune system here, just looking at it from a different picture, this is the ideal. When we have an overreaction, when it's an internal threat, we have autoimmune response. External threat becomes an allergic response. When we have an underreaction, external threat is infection. Internal threat becomes either cancer or heavy viral strains. For me, really having a grasp on what this looks like has taken a lot of the fear out of what I've been experiencing. Because even having an anaphylactic reaction, that's this. I'm in Th2, or Th1 right now. And it's just a weird dynamic, but I have so much less fear going through this, knowing that. Because, when your airway's closed, it's a scary experience. It's not fun. So, now, our immune system, our nervous system, and our endocrine system work hand in hand. They all feed and support each other. You can't have one functioning properly without the other two in place. And so, here it shows how the immune system feeds the endocrine system by modulating the response to infection, creating an inflammatory response. The endocrine system then feeds the nervous system by producing the proper hormones to support the nervous system, to then create the proper body response, which is neuroepinephrine, epinephrine, adrenaline response, that feeds back into the immune system. Coming back this way, we have the inflammatory response, which impacts the nervous system, tells the brain to send to the endocrine system the perception of fear, so it releases new chemicals to overcome whatever the infection or the injury is. And then again, the endocrine system back to the immune system releases cortisol to inhibit the immune response. So it's this constant dance that happens between those three systems that allows our body to function and respond the way that it's supposed to. So now, is everyone in this room a chiropractic patient, Dr. Collins?
No, there are a couple of people who are old now. Resistance is futile.
Okay. Well, I'll talk to you guys later. I have something interesting to share about that. But, in chiropractic, we often talk about if there's an interference to the communication of the brain to the body that impacts the way that our body responds to stress. Yes?
Yes.
Have you guys heard that before? Mm-hmm. Okay. So it works the same in the other systems, but hugely, if any one of them have injury or insult, so stress in their functioning, it's going to impact the other two, which in turn impacts our health. So it's very important that all three are addressed simultaneously and consistently. So with that, what if our immune system could respond to cancer cells? Yeah. Better yet, what if we could prevent them from developing to begin with? Right? So what I call this is getting armed for health. It's my little acronym. And basically, we're going to start from the top and work our way up. And this is, for me, the order of importance to where they factored in. So the first one is diet. One of the things we know as a culture that's become very, very prevalent lately is that having a good, balanced, nutritious, clean diet with healthy foods impacts our health. And so eating clean, nutritious, 3 to 5 to 7 meals a day, depending on how often you're awake, making sure that you have good variety, good balance, bright and dark colors, super important. You can't really see this here, and I meant to bring this as a handout. I'd be happy to email it if you want to pass it on. But basically, it's a basic grocery list of clean eating. So it tells you that some of the important things that you want to have in your pantry. But from a very simple perspective, if you're eating small portions of lean meat, which I like red meat, so I still eat beef, but in moderation. And it's the key, like for a female, eating anything more than 2 to 3 ounces in a serving is wasteful. Your body doesn't know what to do with it, and it becomes stress on the system. But if we were to go to Outback Steakhouse and they gave us a 3-ounce portion of meat, we're going to be mad. You know? So it's a learned behavior to overeat like that. But ideally, 2 to 3 ounces is what our body can process. For men, it's 4 to 6. Unless there are other circumstances, like you're training at a very high level, or you work a very physical job for long hours in a day, that sort of thing, then you can bump it up a little bit and your body will use some more. But one of the biggest errors I think that we make is we're overeating protein in portion, and our body doesn't know what to do with that, so it becomes rancid, rotting waste within our intestinal space, and that clouds up our immune system pretty heavily. So there's that part. Making sure that you're getting a lot of dark leafy greens and your cruciferous vegetables and a fair balance of fruits. Lower glycemic fruits are a little bit better if you're dealing with illness, but if not, you can be open to the majority of the fruits. And then nuts and seeds, good fats are super important. I think that in our culture as a whole, we've learned over the years that fat is bad, but we need good fat to support our nervous system and our neural development. And so by cutting out fat, you're actually short-circuiting yourself. It's like exposing all your wires. And it's a total misconception that eating fat makes you fat. Actually, eating fat supports all of our hormonal systems, male and female, that help us to burn fat. It's sugar and starch that actually causes us to gain fat. But 5 cancer-fighting spices. These things are a staple in my pantry. So we have garlic, ginger, cinnamon, turmeric, and cayenne pepper. Turmeric is a natural anti-inflammatory, very, very helpful. You can do it in food, you can get it as supplement, but it's super beneficial. Cinnamon is a metabolic enhancer, and it's also something that stimulates in the immune response your body's ability to elevate its core body temperature. So fever, very simple, healthy or sick?
Healthy.
Healthy, exactly. So cinnamon supports that process. Garlic and ginger are both antifungal, antiviral, antibacterial. So getting those in our diet is super beneficial for overcoming a lot of that stuff. Doing them in the rawest form possible is the most beneficial, but if you do need to cook it, you want to cook it minimally so that you have the enzymes and all the proper properties to continue to work on overcoming the stuff in your system. In terms of anti-cancer fruits, the superfruits, these are all fruits that are very high in antioxidant content. So does anyone remember what the antioxidant does that we talked about a little bit earlier?
Free radicals.
Mm-hmm. Neutralizes the free radical. So an antioxidant is an electron donor. A free radical is a cell that's missing an electron. So when you eat the antioxidant foods, it actually binds to the free radical cells and makes them reprocess through the normal cellular cycle again. So it actually reestablishes a proper cellular process. So antioxidant is super important. The easy thing to remember with an antioxidant is if it's really dark or very bright, it's probably good for you. Loosely, I'm going to say that. But in terms of fruit, that's generally the case. A lot of people ask me about supplementation, and this is something that could go a lot of different directions, so I don't want to go into it too heavily. I would say if you are in the situation where you or someone you know is personally dealing with cancer and you want more specifics, I'm happy to talk about that part. But it would be very different for different people. And so going into what I did, I don't like sharing that because then people are like, oh, well, you said this, so I want to do that. But in terms of the basics, vitamin D3 is one of the most important supplements that you can take to help your immune system. There are more than 60 studies that have supported that it offers a really broad protection against cancer, helps overcome, and also helps prevent. And the recommended daily amount is 1,000 IUs a day. Probiotics, also super important. So as we talked about in the development of the immune system, that first part of development is the body ingesting the bacteria passing through the canal. And when we ingest that bacteria, that populates our intestinal system, which 80% of our immunity comes from our gut. So there's the vagus nerve, which is the gut-brain connection, and the majority of our immune response comes from the gut, and that's how it interacts with our nervous system. So having probiotics is something that we don't get naturally in our Western diets. That is something that I highly recommend as a supplement. Vitamin K helps with developing strong bones. Bone marrow is one of the most, or the highest contributing factors in our immune system and our immune response in terms of immune tissue. And so vitamin K helps support the proper bone growth and also activates osteocalcin, which is a protein that is an anti-cancer nutrient. And so oftentimes when you hear about bone marrow donors or bone marrow transplants, what they're looking for is that activated osteocalcin to get into the affected body. And so selenium is another one, and this one you have to be fairly careful with, but glutathione is a naturally occurring process within our body, a natural occurring amino acid. And selenium is one of the only supplements that will help to help our body to generate that. There are many different links with glutathione in health and in failing health, but the key with this one is anything more than 200 mcgs a day can be toxic. So it's one that you need to be really careful with. You know, and in terms of going into specifics, like I said, I mean, there's plenty of different things that I tried and did and researched and have worked with other patients on that I'm happy to share in detail personally. But
selenium, is that something that you get from any other source than taking?
you can get it from food, and there, I have a whole food list. I'd be happy to share that. I can pass it on.
I just read that Brazil nuts
Yeah.
are the highest in them, so I make sure I eat 3 or 4 every day.
Excellent. Brazil nuts are also hazelnuts. They're same nut, different name. Yeah. So exercising, moving the body. Exercise is a nutrient that our body requires for health. And it doesn't mean that you need to be Jack LaLanne, pumping it out at the gym 7 days a week, but moving your body is very important, whether that's housework, yard work, dance, playing with your kids, playing with your grandkids, just getting up and being active. It's something that proprioception, which I'm not sure how often you guys talk about it in your office, but it's something that we talk about a lot because proprioception, that movement, where you're at in relation to gravity, stimulates your brain in a way that overrides pain 100% of the time, with the one exception being if you have a fracture. And so if you've ever thought about if you touch the hot stove, your instinct is to pull it away and shake it. That's because our body innately knows that movement overrides pain. Now, with if you are dealing with cancer, I don't recommend that you spend a lot of time in the gym. Quite honestly, your body's weak and you need that energy. But there are other things that you can do to move, to stimulate that same sensation without overtaxing yourself. Outside of that, preventatively, exercise is extremely important. So those who think they have no time for exercise will sooner or later have to find time for illness. Now, looking at this chart here, you can't see the writing very clearly, but here shows an increase and then a decrease. Here we have the decrease and then the increase. And what we're looking at is immune status and risk of infection based on your level of exercise. Now, if you are exercising moderately and you have moderate stress, your risk of infection is going to be at the lowest point. Moderate exercise, moderate stress, risk of infection at the lowest point. one thing that was very hard for me to understand is I was working out like a mad person. Like, I'm talking 40 to 50 hours a week when I was competing. And very high levels of exercise create a very, very inverse relationship to your risk of infection. So there is a point where too much is too much, or overdoing it is hard on the body. And flipping that switch for me was a difficult transition because I thought exercising was healthy. But it's that, it just brings you back to that everything in moderation. You can overdo it. So the next one is mental health. And this one, for me, really was one of the most important. We're not quite at the most important yet, but stress has such a huge impact on our lives and on our bodies. And oftentimes, when you're under stress, you're just trying to get by, so you don't even acknowledge how much is there, what the weight truly is. And it's usually after that period of very high stress that your body just collapses or breaks down. And that's because, you know, our body has protective mechanisms in place to keep it moving. But when we do finally stop and the stress has been that high, your body has to take time to regenerate. And so that can often show up in that way. Now, in terms of methods to reduce stress, there are, you know, huge impacts on the body. And this was one of the other handouts that I wanted to bring, but it just shows, it breaks it down into each of the different systems, which is kind of interesting, and it was helpful for me to know that. But I can email that one to you as well. This is what the stress response looks like. When we have acute stress, mental stress, it creates a whole physiological response that can put us in different immune states. And oftentimes, acute stress is good for our system. It's kind of like pruning the tree. When, like thinking about it from the perspective of a fever, a very simple one. So you have a fever, it elevates your core body temperature. There are some cells that are going to die. That's the purpose of the fever. It's there to kill bacteria, kill infection, and we'll lose some healthy cells in the process. But it's like pruning the tree. So then now when your immune system kicks in, it's going to come back into that space stronger, healthier, bigger, broader branches, right? And so acute stress does that for us. It's important that we have consistent stress. Stress is resistance that allows us to become stronger. When we have chronic stress, that puts us into a state of immune dysregulation, which is where our immune system just really starts to break down. Obviously, we'd like to be in the balanced place, but that rarely happens in real life, at least in my experience so far. So I love this quote here. Prayer is when you talk to God. Meditation is when you listen to God. I think that they're both extremely important. Having a direct connection to whatever that is spiritually for you is a really important part in making it through this process. Because if you can't trust in your connection, if you can't find something that's bigger than you to live for and look forward to, it's really hard to have an emotional anchor to hang on to. And it can get dark and damp and cold. And so, you know, speaking to Spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, but also taking time to listen is a huge important piece of this puzzle. So Herbert Benson did some research. He's a professor at Harvard Med that talked about long-term daily spiritual practices help to deactivate the genes that trigger inflammation and prompt cell death. So there is scientific evidence that shows that prayer and meditation actually improves your immune function. Now, how many of you guys in here take time, just even quiet time, at least once a day? Okay, a few of you. In most cases, it's not a very common thing. We wake up and we're on the go, we go to work, we're on the go, we come home, we got things to do, there's always stuff to do. And especially in this age of technology, we always have our phones, we got the radio on, we got the TV on, we listen to Sirius, we're checking off Facebook. There's always stimulation and interaction that is noise. You know, whether you hear it or not, it's noise. And having that time to be silent, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, allows you to really tune in and listen to your body, to your life, to what's going on around you. It's a really beautiful experience when you actually give yourself that time. I highly recommend it and invite you guys to try it. Who's spoke afterwards? So laughter is the best medicine. Yes, So I had to put that in there. There are studies that show that laughter leads to physical changes in the body, and if there was one thing that I focused on completely in my life during the periods of time that I dealt with cancer, it was laughing. I went to look for every funny movie. I pruned my trees of people in my life that did not help me laugh or did not support what I was going through. I just wanted lightness and laughter in my life, and it was a huge really a fun time for my family too, because they wanted to laugh too. It was scary for them, and that's one thing that, you know, in this, that could be a whole other class in itself too, dealing with the people around you when you're dealing with cancer. It's really hard to navigate the emotions and the thoughts and the opinions of the other people that care for you and are just advocating on your behalf when you're like, no, I don't want to do traditional treatment, or I'm sorry, I don't feel like doing that today. Like, it really is a very delicate line to navigate. So finding things that you can connect on and enjoy is huge for you, but it's also huge for them. And so laughter was the biggest place of connection for us, for my family. And I mentioned earlier that when I got my diagnosis with cervical cancer, my husband and I were not doing well, not living together. And one of the things that came for me through this, that I see as such a gift, not something that I would wish on anyone, and I'm so thankful that it happened for me, is that coming to this place and thinking about what was going on in my life, it allowed me to get very clear on what my priorities were, and to realign the way that my days were set up to honor those priorities. And it was the first time in my life that I can truly remember allowing someone else to take care of me. I've always been a very strong, independent person, and just figured like, I can do it myself. I'll just do it, you know, one of those kind of situations, which in a marriage is very hard. And I didn't acknowledge that. I didn't even understand that before that time. And so when I was going through this, I needed help. I needed support. And one of the things that, you know, I feel like having this, dealing with this crisis, allowed me to reconnect with my husband. And now we have a pretty wonderful marriage. We communicate openly, we connect often, we find things that we can do together. It's not always easy, and we're still very different, but it allowed me to save that. And I'm so appreciative for that, because I don't think I would have changed my behaviors had I not had that wake-up call to say what's important to you and what are you doing. So connecting through laughter was one of our big things, even in the initial stages of us trying to figure out how to be together again. And we watched some really funny movies, so it was good. But laughter stimulates your brain to produce more endorphins, neurotransmitters that not only make you feel happier, but it also reduces pain. So laughter is a natural pain reliever, which, how great is that? That's easy, it's free. So on the other side of this, laughing is similar to exercise. And so when you're dealing with crisis and injury, you don't want to be in the gym. You don't have the energy to do it. But you have the energy to laugh. And repetitive, mirthful laughing is a physical act, one that involves contracting muscles, deepening your breathing, very similar to exercise. So it has similar benefits. Research has shown, in fact, that hearty laughter leads to similar responses in your body as a moderate workout, such as decreases in stress hormones, benefits cholesterol levels, enhanced immune activity, and improved mood. Those are all things I want in my life. So, yeah. Moving on from there, we have rest and relaxation. And again, me being a go, go, go person, that was not something that I did very often. I slept on average 3 to 4 hours a night. And I got a lot of stuff done. And I never felt lacking in sleep. But it was one of those things where I was like, when am I repairing here? I never gave my body that time. And there are a lot of studies, a lot of different information out there behind how much sleep is the right amount of sleep. And I think it might be different for different people. Time magazine did a study, I believe it was in 2012, that they said that for women, 5 to 7 hours was the optimal range of sleep, and evidence of greater than that in a day showed increased risk of heart disease and diabetes. Lesser than that showed increased risk of cancer and autoimmune response. For men, it was I believe it was 6 to 8 hours, so just a slight difference. But I think different people require different things. So just really tuning in and listening to your body, what your body wants and needs is an important part of that. Also having downtime. We talked a little bit before during the meditation part about, being silent or having times of silence. That's, goes into rest as well. Sometimes a 15-minute period of silence, no activity, no stimulation, no TV, no answered questions, and talking on the phone can feel like a pretty good nap. So taking advantage of really being conscious and aware of those moments when you can just rest, even if it's just for a short period of time. So during sleep, your immune system releases proteins called cytokines, which again is the inflammatory response, some of which help promote sleep. Certain cytokines need to increase when you have infection or inflammation or when you're under stress. So that inflammatory response happens in those periods of time, and sleep helps that process. Sleep deprivation may decrease production of these protective cytokines. In addition, infection-fighting antibodies in cells are reduced during periods when you don't get enough sleep. So lacking sleep reduces your immune system's ability to respond. One of the other things that I learned, and this is kind of a big one for me because I still like to get a lot done, and so sleeping 6 hours is really hard. But in Chinese medicine, they talk about that the window of regeneration for most of your organ tissue is 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. So if you are a person that does not function well on a lot of sleep, if you can at least sleep during that window, you're enhancing your body's ability to regenerate organ tissue at the highest potential. So if you need less sleep, make it during that period of time instead of going to bed at 3 in the morning and getting up at 6 or 7. So how many hours of sleep do you guys generally get in a night? Is anyone that's less than 3? Yeah, 3 to 4?
Those people are all dead.
Here. 4 to 6? 6 to 8? That's kind of the majority. Okay. Anyone more than 8? Excuse me. Pardon?
Kind of average that, right?
Yeah, I'd say on average, yes. Yeah. We already talked about no electronics. So the last one, and the most important for me, is alignment, and it comes in 2 parts. First I want to talk about alignment of core values, and then we'll talk about structural alignment. In terms of alignment of core values, like I said before, when I had this wake-up call, it really prompted me to check in with what are my priorities, and am I congruent with what they are? Do I live that? Because you can say what's important to you, but do you really live that? And in most cases, because we deal with a busy life and a quick-fix society, we don't, or we don't acknowledge it. And so has anyone in this room really taken the time to truly sit down and think about what your top 3 or 5 priorities are? Some? It's an exercise that I really invite you to do, and it's not that easy. It's kind of hard to really be truthful with yourself with what that is and really go deep with it. And one way that I recommend that you can do that is think about the qualities that you admire most in others. And then think about how do you rate in those areas. If trustworthiness is an admirable quality that you see in other people, how trustworthy are you? Because if you're living in a state of incongruence, it creates upheaval and unrest within your body. Because, like, I think about this one for me, like, I love when people are punctual. Like, my time is very valuable to me. And so when people are late, it upsets me. Yet I am a person who is always late. And every time I'm late, I feel bad. And it's that process of, if it's important to me and I respect and admire people that are always on time, yet I'm always late, I'm not in congruence with something that's a core value for me. And so every time I have that experience, it creates a neurochemical response within my body that makes me feel bad. And that process, our brain doesn't know the difference between emotional negative feelings or physical trauma. So I may as well be just punching myself in the arm every time I do that. So I do. I invite you guys to think about what are the qualities that you most admire in others, and then rate yourself, how do you do in that? What are the qualities that you expect or hope to see in your spouse, and how clear are you with those? You want to talk about strengthening a relationship? That's a good one. And then allowing yourself practices to come to where you want to be in those areas. Because, I may say that spirituality is very important to me, but if I don't spend any time praying or meditating, am I being truthful to that? And you may not start in the place that you think you are, the place that you think you want to be, but you can very easily prioritize times in your life to do that. So I literally live by a schedule where every morning I have a different area of focus that I call my hour of power, and I spend an hour before I get out of bed in the morning visualizing that area, whether it's my children or my social community interaction or my spirituality, my own self-care, those sorts of things. So I spend an hour thinking about what do I want to attract, what do I want to give in this area, and how am I going to make that happen in my day. And then at night, the last thing I do before I go to bed every night is gratitude. And it's where I just take a moment to think about what am I so thankful for today? And what are the things that didn't serve me? I like including those in there too, because it allows you to have some perspective on what's working and what's not working in your life. And sometimes there are things that I've done that didn't serve me. Some things there are other things that have happened around me. And there's something about it for me that when I write those things down and I cross them out, it feels like I accomplished something, So I have the gratitudes still there in writing that I can always refer back to, but that I'm expressing on a regular basis. And then I take all of those things that don't support or serve me in a positive way, and I cross them out, literally. Because then mentally and emotionally, I feel like I can just let them go and go to sleep with a clear mind. So then we talk about structural alignment. And this is one that for many of you in this room, I'm already preaching to the choir, but it's such an important part of our health and our longevity, and many people just really overlook it. And do you guys, anyone in here have a smartphone? Most people, right? So if your phone was on one bar and you're coming from downtown Seattle and you're not familiar with the area, but you're trying to find college chiropractic, you've got one bar in your smartphone, you're trying to use the Navi, how easy is it going to be to get there? You don't know where you're going, you're not familiar with the area, and your smartphone's not really working for you. How's that going to go? Are you going to get there?
It sounds like next to impossible.
But you'll probably make it. It's going to take some time. But the communication, the cell towers here isn't working for you. It's not in your favor. So it's not going to be a simple process. But you've got all 4 bars, and you're trying the same thing. You're going to get there when you aim to. Are you going to have proper directions? Right? So our nervous system works the same way. And if we're out of alignment, and that's impeding the way that the brain's communicating with the body, putting pressure on those nerves, we're going to be functioning at less than optimal. And so life's still going to happen for us, but it's going to be a lot harder. And when things are functioning at optimal, when communication is clear, our body's going to be able to work better and heal faster. So for me, not even just as a chiropractor, though I am a chiropractor, I can't imagine life without having a clear nervous system. I can't imagine how people, like dealing with what I dealt with this weekend, and the body aches that came with that, the restriction in my chest, the inability to breathe, not being adjusted. I can't imagine what that would be like, having that experience. For me, I got to be adjusted that day, and immediately I could breathe better. Immediate. But there's so many people out there that don't have that understanding or that access or that knowledge that it makes that big of a difference. And it's, I want all 4 bars as often as possible. And when we talk about the impact of where everything goes and what it's doing and how it relates, every single thing that happens within our body runs through our nervous system. So how could you not want that functioning as optimally as possible when you're dealing with a crisis? It's one of the most important factors that we have, that we can control in our health, is taking that step to be adjusted, to get clear, so that our body can do what it's designed to. This was a study back in 1986, and for me, it is still so relevant, especially in the context of this conversation. In this study, Dr. Ronald Perot, who was Chief of Cancer Prevention and Research in the New York's Preventative Medicine Institute, he did a long-term study on 3 groups of people. The first group were patients under chiropractic care that were under care for more than 2 years, so not acute, not dealing with back pain. These are people that made chiropractic a lifestyle. The second group were people not under chiropractic care, but were deemed healthy, clean bill of health from a physician. So physical and blood work, everything looked good. The third group were people that were sick, had cancer or severe autoimmune challenges. So throughout the study, they found that the chiropractic patients had a 200% greater immune competence than people who had not received chiropractic care, and a 400% greater immune competence than people with cancer or other serious diseases. So that's like looking in the general population. A person who is not under care sitting next to you has half the chance of being as healthy as you are. Half the chance. You know, that's an advantage that I'm thankful that I have, that I'm sure many of you are thankful that you have. But a 400% immune competence over someone who's dealing with cancer. So me going through that process and having had this information beforehand, there was not a week that went by that I didn't get adjusted 2 or 3 times. And let me tell you, in going through the process, my belief in chiropractic was challenged. My belief in the way that I knew our body was designed to work was challenged. Because again, I was healthy. Why would I have cancer? But there are different things that come up for us. There are different things that are limitations of matter, old experiences, emotional situations, repetitive injuries, different things like that, that can change the game, even when you're doing almost everything right. But had I not been under chiropractic care, had I not been eating healthy, would I have been diagnosed 3, 4, or 5 years earlier? Because we